glad to be here with you all. What amazing weather you guys have out here. I know you take it for granted, but I'm feeling it. I looked on my phone today and it was like 38 degrees at home this morning, so I will take this day. It's really good to be here. My wife has gotten to spend some time with some of you. She's been out here for 8 weeks helping out with some of the nursing shortages and things, but I came back that was enough time. I came back this weekend to get her and take her home, so we're driving back to Minnesota this week. So, but thank you for those of you who spent time with her and took care of her. And she hasn't been able to come here on Sunday mornings a lot because she's been at the hospital helping out, but I know she spent time with a number of you. So, in fact, let me show you. This is, excuse me, this is a picture of our family. Those are our two boys. The one next to me is our youngest. He's 18. He absolutely despises that picture of himself, which is part of the fun of showing it. Right? Parents, you know, I mean, that's one of the good parts of life is to embarrass your children. So what better fun is there? And then, of course, my wife, Micretia, and next to her is our oldest, Paviel. He is 26, and he lives in the Twin Cities area as well. And we're trying to talk him into moving down to Dallas with us next year, but he's got his own place and his own life, and so we haven't quite sold that deal yet, but we're working on it. I want to start out this morning, though, and ask a couple of questions. I know it's Sunday morning. I know, it's hard sometimes to think on a Sunday morning. You're a little sleepy, but so I'm going to ask some questions, and I got to warn you, they start easy and they'll get more difficult as we go. So we'll see if you guys have the answers to this, but here's the first one. What is the shape of a piece of paper? A rectangle. Okay, that started a little slow. A few of you struggled with that one, so hopefully we've kind of locked in now to basic ninth grade algebra sort of, or is that geometry? I don't even know. Is that algebra or geometry? Geometry, okay. There you go. All right. What is the shape of a stop sign? Octagon. See, that was a tougher question, but we got that a little quicker. Although I always do enjoy the faces of the people who didn't know, because I get to see you go like. Okay, one more. What is the shape of a basketball? Sphere. Oh, we're a smart group here in Sacramento. Okay. We would have accepted circle, but that's a little bit of a kindergarten answer, but we would have accepted it. It's a sphere. All right, one last one. What is the shape of liquid? Whatever its container is in. Teacher, all right. That's cheating? I don't think you know what cheating is. One of the characteristics of liquid is that it does not have its own shape by nature. It needs a container. If liquid does not have a container, it sort of ceases to, it just goes everywhere. You need a container. And whatever you put it in, it will take that shape. So this liquid in here is the shape of this bottle. If I were to take a bowl and pour it in the bowl, it would take the shape of that bowl. That's what liquid does. If I were to take a solid and try to put it into this bottle, it wouldn't fit very well. It doesn't take the shape of it. It would wind up doing damage to itself or the bottle or whichever is softer. It wouldn't fit in there. That's what a solid is. And I want that to sort of be in our mind as we look at some scriptures this morning, because I think I want to use this analogy for us as Christians being called to be liquid. And the shape of our container is the life of Christ, which means that we don't define how we are to go about life, what kind of people we're supposed to be, how we're going to interact with others, how we're going to make changes in the world. We don't actually get to define that. By becoming Christians, we're declaring that, in fact, I am taking up the calling to be liquid, and I am going to conform to a life already lived and defined, that of Christ, and take the shape of his life. Does that make sense? Imagine if you were driving down the street here, which I find to be a challenging thing to do in California. I love y'all, but I don't know that they know how to drive here so well. But it's a little scary and aggressive, actually. And I spent a lot of time driving in Chicago, so I don't know what that means. You do the math on that. But if you were driving down the street and you saw this billboard, and it said, by nature, we yearn and hunger for blank. I want you to think about how, not maybe you would fill it in, because as Christians, we know, well, the answer has to be Jesus in one way or another, right? That's just what we do as Christians. It's like the kid in Sunday school, when the Sunday school teacher asked, what's brown and furry and has a long tail and climbs in trees? And the kid said, it sounds like a squirrel, but I know the answer has to be Jesus. So I don't want you to think of the answer that you know you should put in there. But what would our culture tend to put in there? By nature, we yearn and hunger for blank. And once we've glimpsed some part of its radiance, there's nothing we're not prepared to bear and suffer in order to secure it. Once we get a little taste of this, we'll do anything to get it. What are some of the things that our culture would fill into that blank? Fame? Money? Comfort? Acceptance, power, these sorts of things, right? We tend to, and it tends to be around the world. You go anywhere around the world, it's the same basic answers. We want a comfortable life. We want kind of power. We want to look good in the eyes of others. These sorts of things. That's what we go after in life. That's kind of what our culture is built around. So I want to look at a passage in Acts 16, and then we're going to come back to this and talk about this a little bit. In Acts 16, we have Paul and Silas going around, and it gives this list of different cities in Acts 16, and then it says from Troas, and we went to Samothrace, and we went to Neapolis, and then we traveled to Philippi, a Roman colony. Now, what's weird about that is that would be a little bit like if I said, man, we visited Los Angeles, and we went to San Francisco, and we went to Modesto, and then we came to Sacramento, a Californian city. Well, they're all Californian cities, right? Why emphasize that one is a Roman colony when they're all kind of Roman cities? Well, what Luke is doing here, and there's a couple points where he's going to do it in this passage, he's emphasizing the Romanness, the Roman culture of Philippi is maybe even more Roman than Rome itself. They were serious about Roman culture. Philippi was actually a city that was established by former Roman soldiers who had retired. They were living in Rome, and Caesar would send them out and say, go show the world what it looks like to be Roman. Go found a new Roman city, show them Roman culture and your Roman citizenship. This helped spread Roman culture, but it also got a bunch of retired Roman soldiers out of Rome. You didn't want a bunch of bored soldiers just sitting in Rome with nothing to do, because that is how coups start, So you send them far out. So they found the town of Philippi. And it's very rooted in Roman culture. And so there they are. And it says, they have this whole thing with this girl, and Paul helps her, and then it starts a riot and all of that. But I want to focus on verse 20, it says they brought, this is Paul and Silas, brought them before the magistrates and said, "These men are Jews and are throwing our city into an uproar by advocating customs unlawful for us Romans to accept or practice." They're upset. Now, unlawful is a bit of an exaggeration, but they're breaking custom. They're causing some sort of uproar. And this happened almost every place Paul went, but especially here in Philippi. My question is what gospel was he preaching that was so countercultural that they wanted these guys thrown in jail? They wanted them out. This is going to destroy our society and culture if this is preached, if this is adhered to, if this is listened to. What was it about their gospel that was so countercultural? And then that starts me to question, why is my gospel not that countercultural? Why does everybody seem just fine and comfortable with it? Because if Paul would have just come in to Philippi and said, "I want to tell you about a new God, the one true God who became flesh, and he died on a cross so that you could be forgiven of your sins," and kind of keep that as a private affair to yourself, and then go tell other people about it, and then they would believe that kind of in their heart of hearts too, and they would quietly have their sins forgiven, and then you could, grow and tell other people. Rome wouldn't have cared. Rome just wouldn't have cared. So what is Paul doing? He's preaching something that's going beyond that, that's endangering their entire way of life. And that causes a problem. But it goes on, because it says, so the magistrates took them, they severely flogged them, and then they're thrown into prison. And the jailer's told to guard them carefully. We skip ahead a little bit. They're let out the next day. They send the officers and say, "Release them." And the jailer tells Paul, "Okay, the magistrates have ordered that you and Silas be released. Now you can leave. Just go in peace. Just go. Get out of here." But Paul said to the officers, "They beat us publicly without a trial, even though we are Roman citizens, and threw us into prison. And now do they want to get rid of us quietly? No, let them come and escort them." Here's my question. Why does Paul wait until after the beating to point out the fact that they can't be beaten because he's a Roman citizen? Because there are other times where Paul would say, "Oh, no, you can't touch me, I'm a Roman citizen." But here in Philippi, you see, it's a crime punishable by death to flog a Roman citizen without a trial. This is why they're so like, "What, you just go, okay, just it's okay." And why they're so worried when Paul raises an alarm. It says they were alarmed. Yeah, they were alarmed because their necks are now on the line. So why does Paul wait? Did he forget that he was a Roman citizen while they were beating him? Did it just occur to him, "Oh, you know what? I just remembered." Silas, you're going to laugh at this. This is going to just crack you up. We forgot we're Roman citizens. Why did he forget? Why didn't he say it? Why didn't he stop what was going on? We'll come back to that. But let me tell you a little bit about the Roman world in which Paul is preaching this countercultural gospel. We talked a little bit about this yesterday, but the Roman world is split up into about 2 to 3% of the people are what would be called elites. And then there's different status levels within that. You have senators, equestrians, decurions. Then there's 98% of the people are non-elites. Freeborn, and they mimicked the status levels of the elites. They had freeborn, freedmen, and slaves. And then within that, citizens and non-citizens. Can you imagine Now, it's going to be hard to sort of fully identify with the Roman culture because they're so different than we are. Can you imagine a society where a small percentage were rich and elite and everybody else was kind of down on the bottom and just went along with that? And so everything about Roman life was meant to feed into these status levels. Their legal system was not meant to procure justice, it was meant to keep the social order in place. The economic system was meant to keep the social order in place. If you were elite, you could go certain places and eat certain meals and take part in banquets that non-elites couldn't. You could sue non-elites, but they couldn't sue you. And so there was all these different levels. And everything about life was built on what they called honor. A little different than, for us, honor is like if you do something valorous. For them, honor was praise from others. It was being raised up in status. You wanted to be either high status, and you couldn't really change your status. Like if you were a freeborn non-elite, you couldn't work hard and become an equestrian. In fact, to pretend to be of a higher status level was a crime punishable by death. They were serious about keeping these status levels. And you better, if I'm a higher status, you better give me honor. There are cases where an elite would come in to Rome and some non-elite would not honor him while he was on his horse, and he would have that person thrown in jail. So everything is about praising. It's about being in the presence of somebody of high honor. You would do everything you could to take advantage of your status. That was considered a good thing. You took advantage of people lower than you to push yourself up. The higher up you were, the more freedom that you had. Things like humility and obedience, those were for slaves and the lower non-elites. Freedom, your rights, were for the elites. And so everything fed into that. If you were going to come to a situation like this in first century Rome and hear a speaker, you would want, the whole point of you coming to hear a speaker speak like I am today would be to be in the presence of a higher status person so that you could then go out and boast to people, by the way, I spent the whole day, I know this person. And you would expect that I would spend the first 10 or 15 minutes of my speech telling you how great I am and all the things that I've accomplished just so you could be duly impressed. I think we have a few extra minutes today if you want to. But that's what life was about. In fact, that billboard sign I put up earlier, by nature we yearn and hunger for honor. This was a Roman quote from a Roman writer named Cicero. He said, we Romans, we yearn for honor, for this high status and esteem in the eyes of others. The elites were considered strong, wise, those sorts of words that Paul uses. You were raised up in the eyes of others. And he says, once we've glimpsed even some part of its radiance, there's nothing we are not prepared to bear and suffer in order to secure it. We'll do anything to get this status in the eyes of others. Can you imagine that? They would spend their whole lives. This is a picture of the tomb of Lucius Sabinus. They would spend their whole lives trying to go places, get jobs, get status levels, add to their titles and positions and all this so that they could put them on their gravestones to impress other people at the end of life, like all the things that they had accomplished. I said they were really different than us. Can you imagine a culture that would spend all their lives just to do things so that they could post it and impress other people? Because that'd be crazy, wouldn't it? They would even bribe people to get other titles. So they would try to get titles that they didn't actually do just so they could post it and make themselves look good. It's hard to relate to that, right? In fact, these are all the titles of Sabinus Lucius. And you see he amassed all these things. We're not going to read all those. Historian Garrett Fagan says that the Romans lionized strength over weakness, victory over defeat, dominion over obedience. They thought, we think highly of words like humility and obedience. Those were weak words, a vice to them. That's what the low people had. And it's the way everything ran, and it ran well. That was their culture. Culture's a powerful force, isn't it? A number of years back, my sons and we decided to go to a movie together. So it was going to be myself, my oldest son, who was probably, early 20s at the time, 20, 21, something. My youngest son, his cousin, my nephew, who is 3 years older than my youngest son, but almost a foot shorter, okay? Because my youngest son's like 6'6", so he's a big boy. You have to know that that's part of the story. And then my youngest son's best friend, Evanston. So we go to this movie, we sit down in the back row, and we're sitting there, and you know how they do the trailers? That's the best part of the movie to me, right? I love the trailers because every movie looks good during the trailers. So it always gives you kind of hope. That's like the best part. And then later you see it and you're like, oh, that was trash. But, the trailer is great. So we're sitting there and they start talking amongst themselves, and I can lean over and I hear the buzz and I know what's coming because I hear it. And so my oldest son's sitting next to me and he goes, Dad, can we get some popcorn? Now, if you're a parent, you know what he's asking. He's not asking me for permission or the ability to go get popcorn. What's he want? Money. Right, exactly. Even though this individual has a job, they're asking me for money, so I was like, okay, fine. So I take out some money. I hand it to this child whom I've raised his entire life and provided for and taken care of and loved. I go to hand him money. I say, here you go. And he looks at me and he says, why do I have to get it? And if you're a dad, you might anticipate my response. I said, now there was a number of responses I could have given, including like, well, problem solved. I'll just put the money back. But what I actually said was, because I'm paying for it. And he looked at me and he went, huh. And he grabbed the money, immediately turns to his right, to his younger brother, Elijah, and says, Elijah, go get the popcorn. And Elijah goes, why do I have to get it? And he said, because I drove us here in my car. And Elijah went, oh yeah, okay, that's true. So he takes the money, he turns to his cousin Javen. He says, Javen, here, he shoves the money in front of me, he says, you go get the popcorn. Javen goes, why should I get it? And he said, because I'm bigger than you and I can beat you up. And Javen went, grabbed the money, turns to Evanston, says, Evanston, go get the popcorn. Evanston's like, why do I got to get it? And Javen said, because you're on the end and you're the youngest. And Evanston went, okay. And off he goes. Now, what you've seen there, in generalized terms, is a slice of male culture. It may seem foreign to you. But if you're a man, you're like, yeah, I get it. Because men tend to be competitive. And what you saw there was not conversation. It was a series of mini competitions that each guy lost in succession. And we all understood what was going on. In fact, when my son said, I'm bigger than you and I can beat you up, we were all like, yeah, that's kind of a good one. That's well played. And so that's competition. Now imagine, though, that you have a group of sisters that go. We'll handle this carefully. Delicately. And they're in the theater together, and one of them says, we should get popcorn. The other one will say, you know what, I'll get it. And the one next to her will be like, no, you got it the last time. Please let me get it. And the next one will be like, no, girl, you've been working all day. I'm sure your feet are sore. Let me get it. And the last one will say, you know what? Let's all go together. And they'll be like, yes. And they'll hold hands and they'll all go and stop at the bathroom on the way. Because you have sort of a female culture that tends towards cooperation. And it works. That does not make sense to men. Men are like, why are you all going together? One of you could go. Maybe two to carry if you're getting a lot, but that's, it's more practical. And that's all well and fine. The problem comes in when you get a group of men and women together. And they're all sitting there, and one of the guys goes, hey, get some popcorn. And the guy's like, I'm not getting it. I drove us all here. And he's expecting a competition. Every woman in the row looks down and thinks, what an absolute jerk. And this poor guy has no idea what hit him, and now all the women are mad at him. Because you've had a culture clash, right? It's different than the way you would expect to do it. Culture clashes can be funny, or they can cause wars. It's a powerful force. Now, I want you to imagine for just a moment, I went one slide too far. Can you bring me back one? I don't know how to back this up. There, thank you. I want you to imagine, don't look at the screen just yet. Imagine everything I just told you about Philippi, about Roman culture. And I want you to imagine that you are Philippians. And you're receiving this letter from Paul, that everything I just said about Roman culture is your culture, right? We'll take advantage of any situation. We'll try to get ahead. We'll strive. We want to boast. We want to push ourselves up. We want others to think we're high as possible. We want to raise ourselves up. We want to do all of that. And then you get this letter from Paul. And this is written to the Philippians. And it says, therefore, we went ahead a slide again. Therefore, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any common sharing, in other words, if you want to be a Christian, okay? He says in verse 3, make my joy complete. Here we go, verse 3, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. There's a whole culture built on selfish ambition and vain conceit. They're not bad things. This is right. This is how you operate. He's going right at the heart of who they are. Rather, in humility. Remember, this is considered a weakness in Roman culture. This is for low status people. This is when you have no choice. In humility, value others above yourselves. I'm getting dizzy at this point. Not looking to your own interests. I'm sorry, who's going to look out for my own interests then? But each of you to the interests of the others. And your relationships with one another have the same mindset as Christ Jesus. Here's what he does in these verses. In essence, he's saying, I want to remind you of something, that you are liquid, but not to the culture around you. How are you any different if you look just like the culture around you? What does the world need you for if you look just like the political philosophies of the world around us? If we sound just like the news stations that anybody could turn on in any station, if they get the same answers on race and poverty and division and hate as they could find out there, then what's the point? You're not liquid to the culture around you. You are liquid to your container, Jesus Christ. And he says in the coming verses, now, let me show you your container and remind you what it looks like. Oh, I did it again. Who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. So he is of the highest status, but he didn't use that to his own advantage. That's what you would do in Roman culture. But he says instead, he made himself nothing by taking on the very nature of in the original language actually says very nature of a slave. Now, Nobody in Roman culture would pretend to be lower status than they were. It was a crime to pretend to be higher status, but you would try to boost yourself up as much as you could. Jesus, he says, is of the highest imaginable. He's higher than Caesar. And he took on the lowest status possible. He became a slave. Being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient. On purpose? He didn't go after freedom, he went after obedience. Well, that's what slaves did because they had no choice. He's intentionally lowering his status by becoming not just obedient to death, but death on a cross. Now, Roman writer Cicero said to put a Roman citizen in chains is wrong. To flog him is a crime. To execute him is parricide, like killing your parents. And what shall I call crucifixion? So abominable a deed can find no word adequate enough to describe it. Good Romans didn't even say the word crucifixion in public because it was so shameful. And Jesus went to that status level intentionally. Well, why? For our benefit. That's our container. That's the shape of life that we're supposed to have. And this wasn't just one glorious moment for Jesus, as though, the cross just popped up and okay, I'll willingly go. He lived, his whole life was cross-shaped. It wasn't for his own advantage, his own status, his own comfort, his own security. It was laying all of that down, risking himself, putting himself in danger, putting himself in bad neighborhoods and bad situations for the benefit of others so that they could see a different way. But, it says, God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue acknowledge that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. In the resurrection, God showed that Jesus was, in fact, of the highest status. Jesus didn't have to do it himself. God did it. Why? What's the importance of that? The importance is, if Jesus just dies on the cross, Rome wins. Power wins. Status matters. Power matters. Caesar's might matters. But it is in the resurrection itself that Jesus is vindicated and shown that, in fact, he wasn't laying down his life because he was actually weak or of low status. He was doing it intentionally for the benefit of others. And that is the power of the cross, was the willingness to do what he did not have to do for the benefit of others. That is our container. So, Paul is being taken to be beaten in a jail in Philippi. Why does he not say anything? Well, there's a young church, a brand new church in Philippi. There's riots going on. They want blood. They want somebody. And if they can't touch Paul, guess who they're going to turn on? The small young church. So Paul looks at that situation, he reads it, and he says, I'm going to show you what your container looks like. I'm going to be liquid to it. And he keeps his mouth shut. And he takes the beating. Because imagine what they would have thought of Paul and his gospel if he would have said, hey, I want to tell you about Jesus, and he lived this life, and he laid down, and he carried his cross, and he wants you to do the same, to actually make change in the world, to show a difference. He wants you to pick up your cross and put yourself in dangerous places and lower your status and sacrifice for the benefit of others. And, oh, I'm sorry, you're going to do what to me? Here are my papers. I'm a Roman citizen. You can't touch me. But go ahead and keep holding on to that gospel and the life of Christ, and I'll see you next time in Philippi. What are they going to think? Well, Paul's a hypocrite. It's not real. All that Roman might and power does matter. But here's the other question then. Why then, if he takes that beating, takes it on himself, they're able to escape the ire of the crowd, why say he's a Roman citizen at all? Just to throw it in their face? Just to get them in trouble? No. It's the same reason. This is no longer advancing for me for some reason. Can we go ahead one more slide here? Because Paul understood his container. And what we see in Acts 16 is actually an echo of what we see him describing Jesus doing in Philippians 2. And I think when the church in Philippi gets the letter to the Philippians, they recognize it because they go, oh, I've seen this before. We saw Paul live this out years ago. Just as Jesus refused to exploit equality with God, Paul refused to exploit his Roman citizenship. Just as Jesus willingly suffered for the benefit of others, so did Paul. But just as Jesus is vindicated by a sudden status reversal, the resurrection, showing that Rome was never in charge at all. Power was never really the true force in the world. Paul says, by the way, I'm a Roman citizen. I didn't have to take that beating. I took it willingly. And I think with an eye towards the church saying, for your benefit. He was vindicated by a sudden status reversal. Rome was never in charge here. Rome couldn't have touched me unless I let them. We sacrifice our lives. We pick up our cross because we're called to. And we do it willingly, big ways, little ways. The only reason, if you've ever been an athlete at a high level and you see some of these athletes, Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, Giannis Antetokounmpo, hit big shots in big moments, get all the glory, win the championship, do all that. They're able to do that because of hundreds and thousands and millions of little moments where they sacrificed, where they put in training and effort and preparation so that when the big moment came, they were ready, right? You don't sit on your couch and then suddenly just jump up and go win a championship in a sport. I'm 100 pounds overweight, but I'll go win the championship now. It doesn't work that way. You have to sacrifice. In the same way, Jesus lived his whole life in a cross-shaped way, in a cruciform way, so that when the trial of the cross came, he was ready. We're not going to be ready for big moments if we don't practice laying our lives down in little ways. What if we were driving down the street and saw that billboard and we could fill it in and say, by nature, we yearn and hunger for a liquid life, a cross-shaped life. That's what I go after. Paul says in 2 Corinthians 5:15, and he died for all, that those who live should no longer live for themselves, but for him who died for them and was raised again. This is a really simple concept. This is not new. This is not a concept any of us have never heard before. But it's one we forget. It's often the first one to go. It's the first one to soften a bit. Last slide here. I can't tell you, now this is exactly what you should go do with this, because I'm not the Holy Spirit. I urge you to listen to the Holy Spirit and wrestle this week, how do I put this into practice? And ask yourself 4 questions, that's it. The first one, what does it mean to live a cross-shaped life? What does that look like for me? What's the Spirit saying to me? And again, if I gave you some illustrations, they would fall so short because they wouldn't be exactly your life and your situation. It'd be different. But I'm willing to bet that most of you are sitting there right now with a little bit of a hot seat feeling like, oh yeah, I know exactly what that means for me. I know where I haven't been sacrificing. I know where I haven't been acting in the benefit of others. I know where I've gotten selfish or where I've gone after comfort or security or, I kind of feel the Spirit pushing me and I've just kind of tuned it out. So what does it mean to live a cross-shaped life? Question number 2, how can I be willing to do that? Have you ever been to a place where you're like, you don't want to do something, but you want to do it? Right? Like, I don't want to get in shape, but I want to. So what do you got to do to be willing? I don't really want to lay my life down. I want to be there, but I'm not there. So what do I have to do to be willing to do that? Maybe I got to go back all over and wrestle with just who Jesus is, what allegiance to him means, how arrogant it is to say that he's my Lord and Savior and then not follow him as my King. To say that he's my container, but then act more like I'm a solid than a liquid. Number 3, how can I prepare? It's one thing to be willing to do something, it's another thing to prepare, right? Oh, I want to help people out, but I'm so busy and consumed with my own stuff and my own life and my own schedule and my own time that I'd never have time to really help anybody. But boy, am I willing. I want to sacrifice. I want to go wherever God sends me to, but I can't because I'm so loaded down with debt because I needed to have that second car. And I mean, the new furniture set, we had to have that. We couldn't have a small TV. And how can I prepare? And then finally, how can I look for opportunities? Now, this is an interesting one. This is the one that gets me. Because let me give you an illustration. Here's how I used to, in performative, I'm about to give you a performance, ready? Okay? Here's how I used to go to church in our fellowship every Sunday. Okay, I know what it means for me to sacrifice for the benefit of others. I'm willing to do it. I'm prepared. Okay, let me go to the fellowship and I'm going to look, or out in my neighborhood, wherever, I'm going to look for opportunities to serve others. Here we go. Nice to see you. Hey, brother, love you. Side hug, all right. Okay, back in the car. Wow, hey, I didn't see any needs. I guess I'll be ready next Sunday in case something comes up. But, and it was, my wife is yelling, tell the truth, because she's the one that, got on me a lot. That's not laying your life down for others. It's to actually walk through life like this. Hey, what do you need right now? Looking for opportunities, praying like, God, help me to see things at work. Help me to lay my life down. Help me to ask questions. Help me to make calls, to do those things, to see where the Spirit's actually calling me. To look for these opportunities. So those are the 4 questions. I just ask you to wrestle with this week. What does it mean to be liquid to your container? How can you be willing? How can you prepare? And what does it mean to look for opportunities? Thank you all so much.